Hello and welcome to my first podcast. Thank you all so much for being here. I would like to cover a topic today that I feel like does not receive enough attention, and I'm excited to get started. I will be talking about the reformation of the sex education curriculum and why it's necessary, so let's jump right into it. In researching the current sex education curriculum, I found that the flaws I noticed with the system are not exclusive to my personal experience. Some of the issues that stood out to me initially that sparked my interest in this topic were the lack of important factors considered. Sex education primarily focuses on, at least coming from my own experience, abstinence, female birth control, sexually transmitted infections, domestic abuse, heterosexual sex, and reproduction. This is not to say that these topics are not important. Of course they're important, and they should continue to be included. However, after conducting a survey with the participation of my classmates and peers, it was clear that I was not the only one who believed this curriculum needed improvement. I asked the participants a series of 7 questions, including the gender of the participants, if they were comfortable sharing, if they had sex ed in high school, the topics covered, if they were satisfied with the curriculum, how the course was beneficial to them, how it was lacking, and if it was worth improving the curriculum. The results of the survey were outstanding. Those who did experience the course in high school believed that although it was beneficial, there was a lot lacking from the program and that there is work to be done. I'd like to share with you some examples that I pulled from their responses. The course, needs to be more diverse and inclusive to all identities. I would have liked to learn more about sexuality, gender identity, pleasure, and felt more free to have open conversations about sexuality, gender, and sex in general. It was a health course, so only part of the course involved topics on sexual education. It was also only for half of the year, which was insufficient. Obviously, there are a lot more topics that they forgot about, such as discussions on rape, consensual sex, homosexual intercourse, and ways to practice safe sex between the same gender, more forms of contraceptive, etc. It should have included contraceptives, multiple sexualities, actual unbiased information. Homosexuality was disregarded, and the teacher discriminated against homosexual students who asked questions for their health. Also, sex ed information and videos were 20 to 30 years old. I genuinely don't even remember the class, so it hasn't been beneficial at all. I had to figure everything out on my own. So those were a few quotes that I pulled. But the question is, are the curriculums solely lacking and have no benefits? No, they do have some benefits, and I'll share some that I also pulled from the survey as well. The only thing that felt beneficial was learning about the different types of STDs. Everything else felt very unbeneficial and outdated. I learned the different forms of birth control and could make more informed decisions for myself. It was the only place where we sat down and talked directly about these topics. It wasn't perfect, but it was needed and beneficial. It taught me how to stay safe during sex and an idea of what to expect when I decided to become sexually active. It taught me how to use a condom and what consent means. So regardless of these benefits, they only cover a sliver of what students should be exposed to. In a course centered around often uncomfortable and potentially sensitive topics, it should be a welcoming, unbiased, and accepting space, not a space where students are afraid to talk or they view these topics as something to laugh at, which, in my experience, a lot of people laughed at it. Sex education programs have a huge capacity to influence the students within the classroom, molding their opinions and their beliefs. If someone is not exposed to information in a proper format, how could they come to understand and respect that information later in life? An example of this comes from a video following Renee Walker, a concerned parent, and quite a cool parent if you ask me, that believed the sex education program her child was enduring was biased and doing a disservice to her child's education. The school was enforcing ideals such as abstinence until marriage in exclusively heterosexual relationships, instead of teaching information to prepare children for the world and to have the knowledge and understanding of human sexuality at their disposal. The school was forcing personal beliefs and values on their students. Regarding a lesson on abortion that her child had endured, Walter stated that he was so completely unconscious about it. So all of this information really alarmed me for a couple of reasons. One, it seemed that what he was being taught about abortion was very one-sided and biased. And the second reason that I was feeling very concerned and very alarmed was the fact that what I had been told about the program and what he had learned seemed like 2 entirely different things. End quote. The information was taught so that the students would not think for themselves. It provided no source of autonomy and provided false information to view abortions as a villainous act. Of course, this source is not specific to solely abortions, it's merely an example, but it reinforces my argument to show issues with sex education programs and what they are built around. One cannot force their beliefs on another person, especially in a classroom. Students are meant to be presented with information, and they need to interpret it themselves and create their own values. Now, of course, the fault is not always on the teacher. Most teachers, at least the ones in my past, have tried their best to be as unbiased as possible and not force anything on the students. The decision-making in the curriculum comes from administration and board members, those with more influence in the system. But how are these decisions being made, and why are they being made that way? In an academic journal titled The Politics of Youth Sexuality, Civil Society, and School-Based Sex Education in Croatia, it covers this exact question in a study conducted in Croatia. There is much reluctance in the decision-making processes surrounding controversial topics such as this, especially when other ideals come into play. As many of you may expect, religion and faith-based values often get involved and have a huge influence on decisions. This journal states, quote, "This decision-making process, we argue, exposes political links between heterosexual values and national culture. It also highlights how sex education policy became a site for reinforcing and challenging heteronormative values, and reveals complex relationships between sexuality, religiosity, and national culture." End quote. Additionally, think to yourselves about the power of a parent complaining to a school. Many of us may have heard about a parent complaining about something they don't agree with, or have a parent who does so. Schools often don't want to deal with this, especially in public schools where taxpayers are funding the programs. They will do everything they can to avoid a parent contacting the administration and creating a bigger issue. This is another reason as to why controversial topics such as sex education would be such a hassle to handle. Parents are so concerned about corrupting their children's brains, therefore they will do anything to control their education. But the fact of the matter is, and some of you may be bothered by me saying this, parents don't always know best, as much as they would like to believe. Values and beliefs may collide where they shouldn't, thus hurting a student's education. Whether a student comes from a religious, heterosexual, cisgender household or a queer, non-religious household, they should all have the opportunity to be exposed to the education of human sexuality. How would one know that their existence is valid as a queer individual, that queer sex is normal, that consent is important in all relationships, that protection should be used in all forms of sexual activity, not just heterosexual sex? Queer individuals should understand heterosexual cisgender individuals, and heterosexual cisgender individuals should understand queer individuals. We are all people that deserve respect and acceptance in our own lives. From a course such as sex education and human sexuality comes battles with mental health and rising issues in the mental health of adolescents. The course is full of sensitive and valued topics that students should be exposed to in a positive way in order to better understand their bodies and to see themselves being represented and respected, even if the material is not specifically focusing on them. I came across an academic journal by Dong-Wai Lee and Nan H. Son, which focuses on the relationships between mental health and acceptance. First, we must ask ourselves, what is mental health? What does that mean to each of us individually, and how do we positively maintain our own mental health? Think about that for a moment and reflect for a second or two. Maybe even write it down. Pause this video to give yourself a moment to do this. In the journal, I came across a definition of mental health, which covers aspects which many people may not think of right away. The authors write, quote, "One of the well-known definitions of mental health included the following elements: a positive self-regard, the ability to have concern and care for other people, an openness in interpersonal relationships, creativity, the ability to engage in productive work, the ability to love, and realistic self-perceptions." End quote. Give yourself a pat on the back if your personal definition included any of these factors. And even if it didn't, still give yourself a pat on the back. I bet you did great too. Now to look deeper into this definition and its connection to sex education. Let's go one by one with a couple of these aspects. A positive self-regard. Now, how do we gain a positive self-regard, you may ask? By seeing ourselves represented in others and in education, knowing we aren't alone, and knowing that we matter in every way. Sexuality and sex are difficult topics to talk about with peers, especially at a young age, and aren't always portrayed correctly in the media, meaning that being within a classroom on human sexuality is the perfect opportunity to better understand oneself and know that we are normal and valued. So many queer children think that there's something wrong with themselves for being queer, thus taking a toll on their mental health. But if adolescents are taught in a safe and comfortable setting that their existence is valid and they belong in the curriculum, then they will have a more positive self-regard. Moving on to B, the ability to have concern and care for other people. Consider the saying, put yourself in someone else's shoes. No one can truly understand someone else unless they put themselves in someone else's shoes. Although we can't physically do that, we can be educated about all identities and experiences. Sex education has the potential to allow students to view other identities different from their own and realize that they are present and normal, that they have a place in the world and in the classroom. They will have greater acceptance for their peers and hopefully realize that compassion first is greater than judgment. I hope that you can realize the pattern here and see the connection of mental health and sex education. Everything is connected in our lives, and all of our experiences have the capabilities to influence our mind and bodies. Now that we have all of this information laid out in front of us, how can we truly improve the sex education curriculum? How can we make a change? I discovered a study which focuses on how to make LGBTQ inclusive sex education programs actually inclusive. This study was performed through interviewing teachers and student focus groups within 4 different schools in order to determine what the students felt they needed in learning about inclusion. Through guided interviews and learning, the students created the guidelines that defined what they saw as a satisfactory curriculum. The study states, quote, students wanted a more LGBTQ inclusive curriculum defined by 1. Including identity topics integrated throughout the curriculum, 2. More holistic discussion of sexuality, 3. More information about identity development, and 4. The creation of a safe space through an accepting, non-judgmental tone from teachers, end quote. What's the best way to make improvements in school and know how programs are being received? Ask the students. The students are the ones attending class every day, and they know what they like and dislike. They know how a lesson makes them feel. This source chose to communicate with the students, and they made quick progress that provided amazing results. The study provided actual improvements in the curriculum because they utilized their greatest resource on hand. Students deserve to have a voice in their learning, and of course, they can be asked anonymously to maintain their comfort and control in the situation. Students have the ability to create great change, so why not give them the chance? In addition to the study talking with students, I came across a few tips for making the classroom a more comfortable environment for students, especially when talking about human sexuality. The author of this article, Mickey Valentine, is a huge advocate for sex education reform and reproductive justice, and they bring up some amazing points, so let's dig right into it. The 6 ways to make sex education in the classroom more inclusive are as follows. 1. De-gender the language of how we talk about genitals. We often assume that all women have a vagina and all men have a penis. We gender people before we even know them. To quote Valentine, one of the main reasons why trans and queer people don't know their bodies is because sexual education follows a specific type of dichotomy, male equals penis, female equals vagina, without taking into accountability that this has the potential of being toxic. End quote. Moving on to number 2, ask for pronouns and names. Even though the names on the attendance sheet may say one thing, not all students want to use those names. Ask students what they prefer to be called and what pronouns they use. It's a sign of respect and lets students know that they are valued and understood. Do not question their preferences. Students deserve their privacy and respect from peers and teachers. Again, asking anonymously can help students feel more comfortable. Number 3, de-gender the language of how we talk about genitals. You may notice that I repeated step 1, however, we're going to look at this step in another context. Some people may use different ways to talk about their genitals because they feel uncomfortable using the anatomical terminology. Valentine states, quote, this is on a majorly case-by-case basis, and if someone is comfortable enough to discuss this with you, please be considerate of the fact of the reasons why they might do this, one of them being that they don't want to associate with the gender they were assigned with at birth, and using a different name for their genitals provides them with affirmation of their bodies. End quote. Number 4, validate and be affirming. Check in with students and peers. Know that in their minds they can be questioning a lot or feeling like they should act a certain way. The article states, quote, everyone's experiences are different and unique, and it's important to remember that, end quote. Be a good role model and ensure that everyone feels that they belong and that what they are going through is normal and valid. I can't stress that enough. Number 5, assume that people don't know the basics of Trans 101. Teach terminology. Don't consider heterosexuality and being cisgender the norm. And I would say that this isn't exclusive to just transgender terminology. Teach all terminology, whether it's queer or heterosexual or cisgender. Teach it all, please. Number 6, understand not everyone will be open and willing to learn. Some students may not want to change their beliefs and opinions and are not willing to take a look at a new perspective. In this case, you will have to take another approach and give your best effort. To quote, "You as an educator can only do so much and try so hard. Just know that if you put in as much effort as you could, it does pay off." End quote. These topics help to better understand our own bodies, and help us understand people around us. I think the 6 ways the author listed heavily contribute to a positive influence on mental health and kinder beliefs. To provide some final words from Valentine, quote, "LGBTQ people are here to stay. It's important to give them accurate information and affirm them. They are not wrong for having sex or wanting to know about their bodies. Sex is not a dirty thing. Everyone wants to reform education, but not include queer and trans youth in your discussion. You're not advocating properly when you put LGBTQ youth in the back burner." End quote. Of course, the information provided from the case study and the article are not the only ways to make the classroom more inclusive and to improve the sex education curriculum, but they allow for a better understanding and a good starting point. Sex education is not something to be glazed over or taken lightly. The classroom should be a comfortable and welcoming space. These are students' identities and mental health we're talking about here. People deserve to be respected and understood. Ask yourself these questions, whether you're in a sex ed class, have previously been in one, or you're teaching a sex ed class. How has the program benefited or is benefiting you? How do you feel it could be or could have been better? How do you think it affected or affects your mental health? Thank you so much for listening to this podcast, and I hope that you can take something away from what I've shared. I hope that the information I presented to you gives you the opportunity to realize why sex education reform is necessary and allows you to reflect on your experiences. Creating a more inclusive environment is creating a more accepting and comfortable environment. Thank you.